A few things that I want to establish as I talk about this evening. First of all, I'm really glad that all of you are here and that you are showing an interest in this. I want to acknowledge up front that poly relationships and open relationships are still, at least in the United States, tend to be stigmatized to an extent, and there tends to be a lot of misinformation out there about it, and people tend to make a lot of assumptions about open and poly relationships that either aren't true or are hyperbolic. And so part of my goal here is to deconstruct some of that, to provide hopefully like what I would consider and what hopefully people who are in poly relationships would consider to be accurately representative of their experience to some extent. But I'm also coming at it from a clinical angle. I am not myself in an open or poly relationship. I am in a monogamous relationship. And my relationship is in no way open in the sense that, like, which I'll talk about what that means here in a minute. But I have worked with many relationships that have either gone from monogamous to open, where basically they attempted to open the monogamous relationship up or invite other partners in to become poly. I have also worked with people who have been poly from the start with their configuration. I have worked with primary dyads that have outsiders that are part of the relationship. I have worked with exclusive, non-open poly relationships. There are lots of different, there's lots of configurations. So I am not going to be able to capture everything that it is to be poly this evening, because poly can mean different things for different people, and the rules that people construct for their relationships in poly relationships are as varied as they are in monogamous relationships in the way that people have implicit and explicit rules. Okay, so I'm talking about this again from a space of a therapist who has worked with several of these relationship configurations. I am aware of some of the literature that's out there about this stuff, although there's not a ton of it, and yeah, that's the angle that I come at this from. So, just so everybody knows. Say you and your partner every so often invite someone over for a sexual three-way, but only to that extent. Would it mean that your partner is poly? Probably not, bloody, and that's what I'm going to talk about here in a second. I'm going to kind of talk about how you can identify where a relationship is at a given point in time. I think another important thing to remember about relationships, particularly poly and open relationships, is that they are often quite fluid and don't tend to have the same degree of rigidity that monogamous relationships often have. Okay, again, not better or worse. By the way, I'm not even gonna entertain conversations about whether monogamy or polyamory is better, so don't even bring that. Okay, I know I don't often set like really hard rules with like the chat, because overall you all are really respectful, but I just want to let you know I'm not even going to get into that. What works for some people does not work for others. Monogamy works for a lot of people. Polyamory works for others. No one is better than the other. Okay, so I would encourage you, if you find yourself being like, ooh, that wouldn't work for me, that doesn't feel right for me, that's totally okay. This stuff doesn't have to work for you. I just think it's really cool that everybody that's here right now is interested in learning about what it is, and hopefully in doing this talk tonight it will help everybody have more of a sense of what it is, some level of accurate representation around it, and maybe a level of curiosity around it. I'm not suggesting anybody here has to be in an open or poly relationship. I'm not suggesting that anybody here has to be in a monogamous relationship. I'm just saying, do the relationship thing that works for you. This is just me being able to talk about open and poly relationships from somewhat of a clinical standpoint, but also just from a what is it and how do we understand it. So just wanted to make sure that I established that. Okay, so, and I'm gonna weave in maybe a little bit of talk about relationship development in this as best I can, but I don't want to get too in the weeds with that and too confusing with that. So, okay. So the first thing that I want to talk about here, and establish is the idea of what is monogamy versus polyamory. Okay, so if we look at this as existing on a type of spectrum, say, okay, monogamy, some of this might sound very basic, but I think it's really important to understand to kind of set the baseline here. Okay, monogamy and polyamory refer to the configuration of a relationship and the nature of the relationships within them in terms of who is involved. Okay, so monogamy is talking about basically a dyad. Okay, so I am in a monogamous relationship, which means that I am in a relationship with my fiance, and she is the only person that I consider to be in a relationship with, in an intimate partnership. That being defined for me and for her as, you know, like, she is my primary, like, attachment figure. She's who I live with. She is who I have a sexual relationship with. All of this stuff, right? And that those rules and expectations and boundaries that we have in our relationship are basically held to where the level of intimacy that we have in our relationship is something that we expect only from each other. Okay? So dyad is just a two-person relationship. Yes, Thidian. Okay? So when we're talking about monogamy, yes, we're talking about two people. That looks like it says poople. There we go. Two people. Okay? So that's what monogamy is. Okay? Polyamory, on the other hand, is where there is more than a dyad that is considered to be in a committed relationship. That's the other thing. Commitment usually plays a role in this, okay? So I have a commitment and rules with my partner. Polyamory is the same deal. It's so I'm going to write commitment here. Okay? It's commitment to either multiple dyads. This is where this gets kind of confusing because it depends on the configuration of the system. But you could have multiple dyads, you could have triads, and you can have kind of like whatever direction. So if you've got person 1, person 2, person 3, person 4, maybe it looks like this. Okay? Or maybe it's some configuration of this. Okay, but basically the idea behind this is that in my polyamorous relationship, I am in a committed relationship with multiple people. Sometimes you see where it looks like this. Okay, so like in the example of, like if you think about, like, I hate to use this as the example, but like if you think of like the Sister Wives on TLC, like you have basically like one guy that then has multiple wives, but those wives are not necessarily in a committed relationship to each other. There's multiple kind of monogamous commitments with one person, but they're all in that relationship with him. Okay. For example, I have my wife and I have my girlfriend, but my wife and my girlfriend are not with each other, so it's multiple dyads. There we go. That's okay. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Peregrine. Yep. Okay. But the essence of this is that there is a level of commitment, consistency, and rules in those relationships and in that configuration. And oftentimes in polyamorous relationships, all of the parties involved, they know about the configuration and they know about the people that are involved within the system. Okay? Have a good night, Mindstrom. Good to have you here, man. I hope you have a good one. Okay? So, does that make sense? I want to make sure that makes sense because that's kind of the best way that I can clarify this without getting too far into the weeds with the complexity. So if poly is one person being with multiple partners, then what does it say? 3 people who date each other. That would also be polyamory, bloody. Okay? So polyamory or poly is like all encompassing. Okay? So it's basically anything, to some extent, it's anything that's not monogamy. Okay, so if there are 3 people who are committed to each other equally, great. If there are 3, you could have a configuration where, say, there are 3 people that are together like this, but then this person is also committed to this. Okay, or maybe you have where this configuration. I mean, I could go bananas with this. Okay, like I could add another person here that's committed to this person and to this person, but not to this person. Then you could have a person out here that's like this. Okay, what's up, Gerbo? But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is that this entire system is acknowledged, and that there are various commitments and rules, both explicitly and implicitly stated within that configuration. Okay. Oh yeah, this can get absolutely bananas. Okay. And a lot of people will look at that and they will think to themselves like, oh my God, well, how could that possibly work? And that's one of the things that you really want to check, because there are, for many people, it's a completely functional relationship because it has been explicitly talked about and because that is what is understood from the start of the relationship. So if it works, like if it's not mono, then it's poly. How can there be a spectrum? So it's not really a spectrum, bloody. It's not really a spectrum. You're going to see what I mean here in a minute, because I'm going to be able to map once I complete this map. So hold on to that thought. Channel Tree Sapling News. What a great username. Welcome in, Channel Tree. It is good to see you. Good to have you in here. Okay. No, okay, so Bonnie, we're going to talk about that in a second. Okay. Ripshot, thank you very much for the subscription. That is very kind of you. I appreciate that very much. So yeah, Bonnie, that would be often considered cheating because it violates the rules of a relationship. So one of the things that we need to establish here, I'm going to write here, is that there are rules involved with these relationships. Okay, so it is possible to cheat in polyamorous relationships as much as it is possible to cheat in monogamy. Okay, extradyadic relationships are not always acceptable to a relationship, even if you are in a configuration with multiple relationships involved. Okay, so that's a really important thing for me to establish, and it's actually a really great question, Bonnie, that I appreciate you asking very much. Okay, so this is just to establish the difference between monogamy and polyamory. Okay, so monogamy, dyad, 2 people that are committed to each other and have rules in their relationship. Polyamory, multiple relationships that can be a whole variety of various configurations that also have rules and commitment and degrees of love and all of that fun stuff. Okay, so now I'm going to draw on another plane. Okay, we're going to do this. So now what we're going to draw here is what is open versus closed. Okay? Yeah, we're getting 2-dimensional here, Victoria. Get the x-axis and the y-axis. Okay? So first, I'm going to talk about closed because that's the one that most people are used to. So in theory, when the wife knows it's okay with the poly, if the affair knows it's okay with it too, well, it wouldn't be considered an affair then, Bonnie, because it fits within the rules of the relationship. So which brings me to, oh yeah, we're going to talk about that for sure. Blushing, absolutely. I'm really glad you said that though. Okay, so here's the thing. Closed. Okay, what do I mean when I say closed? What I mean when I say closed is in a relationship, if the relationship is closed, what it means is that there are rules in the relationship that set the relationship up in such a way that extradyadic relationships or other relationships, whether sexual or emotional or whatever it might be, are not permitted within the rules of the relationship. Okay? So what this means is, let's imagine for me and Allie, for example, we're in a closed relationship, which means that neither one of us can, because we have explicitly stated this within our relationship, neither one of us can have sex with somebody else in our relationship. Also, neither one of us can really have a deep, like, intimate relationship that is similar to what she and I have outside of our relationship, because that would constitute an emotional affair. Okay, so my primary attachment is to my fiance. My fiance, right, on a romantic level, yes, Gerbo. I cannot have a romantic relationship with somebody else, and neither can she. That has been established in our relationship, and that's kind of just like a rule that we have. And again, we can't have a sexual relationship outside of our relationship. Okay, so there are rules around that. So our relationship is closed to outside relationships. Sorry for just hitting the mic there. I hope that wasn't too loud. Okay. Gerbo, I'm actually going to talk about that. I'm going to weave that in here after I establish all of this. Okay. So hang with me. Maybe that'll help. Okay. So that's what closed means. Can't, won't. You can use, Ripshot. You can use those interchangeably in the sense of, like, I mean, I technically could have sex with somebody else, but that would not be okay within the rules of our relationship. Okay, Allie technically could have sex with somebody else, but I would not be okay with that. So as a result, there are rules in our relationship that other people cannot be involved in that way. That depends on the relationship, Bloody, and how the meaning that people make out of it. Some people would not consider that to be problematic. Other people would. I tend to not see that. I don't see that as being like an affair. I mean, if Allie tells me that she thinks Jon Snow's hot while we're watching Game of Thrones on Sunday, like, I don't consider that to be cheating. The important thing to remember about cheating, by the way, is that cheating is a violation of rules. Okay? So what might be considered to be cheating for one configuration is not considered cheating for another configuration, because it's all about the rules of the relationship that get violated, whether they are explicitly or implicitly stated. A lot of monogamous relationships do not actually explicitly state that they are monogamous. It often goes assumed, or implicitly there are expectations that you just won't sleep around. Whereas in polyamorous relationships, there has to be a lot more open communication and explicit rules within the relationship more often in order for that to be successful. I would argue that monogamous relationships need to be as explicit as well, but we just often aren't because we assume we're on the same page. Okay. Yeah, Ripshot. See, exactly, and I appreciate you saying that, because it's an illustration of how it differs by relationship. We very much have a cultural assumption of monogamy. Absolutely. Especially in the United States, it's assumed that people are monogamous for the most part. Bloody, it can hurt the relationship if the people in the relationship don't agree to them. So, really the idea behind explicitly stated rules in a relationship is that the people who are in the relationship agree that those rules are the rules that they should follow. If you get into a position where there are rules in your relationship that nobody in the relationship, like that people aren't on the same page, yeah, you're going to have problems. Absolutely, Bonnie. Absolutely. Always good to talk about it. I would agree with that very much. Okay. Yeah, Ripshot. I mean, that is true. Although I can usually pull some sort of general information towards it. So, there's nice little points of illustration within them, but it is true. I mean, I do have to say it depends a lot, and that's the nature of humans and human relationships, which is also why I love my job as a therapist, because I get to see so many variations in what people do. Okay. So we talked here about closed. So now when I talk about open, what we're talking about here is within the relationship, are there rules in the relationship that allow for outside extradyadic relationships to be involved within the relationship configuration that has been established. Now, that means different things for different people. There are some relationships where they might say that the relationship is open in the sense that you are allowed to have sex with somebody outside of the relationship, okay? Or outside of the committed relationships. So we will permit each other to have a sexual relationship with somebody else. Now, oftentimes when there is an openness that happens within the relationship, there are explicitly stated rules around that. So I have seen many open relationships that will say you can have sex outside the relationship, but you need to tell me, and you can't, and you have to use protection, and maybe there are some rules over what you are allowed to do or not do when you engage in the sexual encounter. Okay. There are other forms of open where people will say, within the context of this relationship, if you have a certain emotional need that you need to get met from somebody else because I can't provide it for you, then by all means, you're welcome to go outside the relationship to get that need met. Okay? Uncle Bill, that can happen. But that is also why in open and polyamorous relationships, it is very important to have all of the rules and expectations explicitly stated. And then usually people who are used to being in polyamorous relationships have a way of being able to handle that. In the sense of like they understand what the rules and expectations are, what the consequences are for if the rules are not followed, all of that. That all has to be explicitly talked about up front. That is not true, Bloody. Polyamorous relationships can be just as stable or even more stable than monogamous relationships. There's really no way to qualify whether a particular, like it would be the same thing as one monogamous relationship can be more stable than another monogamous relationship. One polyamorous relationship can be more stable than another polyamorous configuration. It's not really a thing that's quantifiable in terms of like stability. Stability is more rooted in the ability for people to talk about their rules and to talk about their expectations, and that everybody has some level of consensus on the rules and configuration of the relationship. So it is true, Ripshot. I have noticed that difference as well, and I do also find that to be quite interesting. So, okay. So that's basically what open means. It means that there are rules in our relationship that allow for a level of exploration outside of the relationship that we agree to and kind of have a co-constructed agreement on. So the reason that I draw it this way and why I talk about it this way is to illustrate a point, which is to say that you can have, I'm going to switch colors here for a second, hold on. Okay, so you can have open monogamous relationships, okay? You can have closed monogamous relationship. You can have open poly relationships, and you can have closed poly relationships. Okay. Hello, Jan. All right. Awesome Jossum. Hello to you. Awesome Jossum. Man, there's some cool usernames tonight that I haven't read. So, very nice to have you in here, Awesome Jossum. This is something that a lot of people don't understand when they think about what polyamorous relationships potentially are, or what they think they are, is a lot of people think that polyamorous relationships are always open. And that is not true. People also think that monogamous relationships are always closed, and that is also not true. Oh, I'm glad you randomly showed up too, Ripshot, and I appreciate very much that you subbed. It was very kind of you to do. So I'm really glad you're here, and I'm glad that you're finding it interesting. Okay, so now that we've talked about what the differences are between monogamy and polyamory and open and closed, you can see the way that this works. Okay, so I, Dr. Mick, am in a closed monogamous relationship. Okay, there are monogamous relationships that are open, which means that what they might do is say, okay, oh, and actually, I think this might be getting to what you're asking me, Jinx. What about the entire thing about primary dyads? My SO and I are each other's primary, but either of us is allowed to date, sleep with, or even love others. We always just keep each other first, if that makes sense. How would you describe that? Awesome, Jinx. The way that I would describe that, first I would defer to you with the way that you describe it, but if you were going to ask me oh my God, Rocket, thank you for the Hello, Sage. You the best. For everybody who just came here for the raid, oh my God, for everybody who just came here with Rocket Sage's raid, welcome. I am Dr. Mick. Hold on a second. Let me introduce myself. I am Dr. Mick. I am a licensed couple and family therapist in the state of Illinois. I have a PhD in human development. I host game sessions with a therapist, so usually I'm playing video games while I'm talking about mental health and all sorts of fun stuff. Tonight is actually a mental health topic night, so I am talking about open and polyamorous relationships, which is a clinical specialty of mine, so I hope you hang around because we're doing some learning tonight. But it is really good to have all of you here. Sage, I am really grateful for you bringing your people here. Barney, I scratched my eye, so it's red. It looks gross. But thank you to all of you who are here and who came with Sage. I hope you hang around for a little while because this is a pretty cool place. I have a really great community, and I'm a big fan of what Sage does. So shout out to Sage, by the way, for anybody who doesn't follow her. She's a geologist, and she does basically what I do with geology. So I do it with therapy. So I saw somebody ask me if I practice poly. I am not in a polyamorous relationship. BioRoots, I am not in a polyamorous relationship myself, but I have worked with several polyamorous relationships and open relationships in my career, and it's a clinical specialty of mine. I read about it. I have known several people who are in open relationships. So we are talking right now about what the difference between monogamy and polyamory is, as well as what the difference between open and closed relationships are. And we're sort of talking about how you can map a relationship given those things. So polyamory can be just as amazing as monogamy, said who, because people can find an immense amount of fulfillment in those relationships and are able to sort of navigate their lives in the way that they want to and can feel a sense of freedom within their relationships while also having the level of love and commitment and attachment and all sorts of fun stuff in their relationships. They just get to have it with more people involved. So a thing that I mentioned in my stream before all of you wonderful raiders came in was that Comet Girl, thank you for the host. Somebody else hosted me. Who else hosted me? I missed somebody hosting me, but thank you for hosting me, whoever it was that I missed. You're welcome to tell me. But yes, all of these things work. One of the things that's important to know is that that no configuration here is better than anything else. So I don't really get into talking about is monogamy better than polyamory, is open better than closed. It's all about what works for the people that are involved. And any of these four configurations that I'm talking about here can work and can be successful. And any of the four can also be destructive and not work. So, okay. Yeah, said who, definitely can't help you with that, but I can certainly talk about what it's like when people do have that. So, all right. So I will quickly, just because of all the new people here, I'm going to quickly do an overview of what I've talked about so far. So no, it is not said who. So here's what it is. So monogamy is two people It is a committed relationship that has both explicitly and implicitly stated rules about the relationship, but it is often a committed relationship that is romantic and often sexual in nature between two people. Polyamory, on the other hand, is basically anything that isn't that. So you can have polyamorous relationships where there is one person who has a committed relationship to two different people. You can have where all three people are involved in a committed relationship. You could have this type of configuration. You could have this type of configuration. You could have this type of configuration. It's basically any type of configuration that you want with multiple people that are in a committed relationship with each other, that have agreed about the rules and commitment of that relationship, and that there are just sort of like multiple people that are involved within that configuration, okay? When we talk about closed relationships, what we're talking about is that the relationship and whatever that configuration is, whether it is monogamous or polyamorous, is closed to the idea of bringing in other people or other experiences that are outside the rules and bounds of the relationship. And if we're talking about open relationships, we're talking about people being able to explore and bring in other extradyadic relationships for whatever the reason, because that is agreed upon and within the rules of the relationship configuration. So when everybody so kindly joined us for the raid, which again, thank you, Sage. When everybody joined us for the raid, what I was starting to talk about was the difference between these four types of configurations, and saying that you can have a monogamous relationship where it's two people that are in a committed relationship that have opened their relationship to some extent. So what this could mean is that, let's say there is a dyad here, okay, that is connected in some ways, okay? Excuse me. Okay. Yes, I am going to upload this to YouTube tomorrow, Jed. So let's say this relationship is a monogamous relationship that is committed to each other, but that relationship has decided that this relationship has decided that they are interested in opening up their relationship sexually. So what they might agree upon is that each person in this relationship, that this is the primary dyad. Okay. I know. Oh my God, Lyrna. How do you bring this up to your partner? It's a really cool question, BioRoots. Openness and honesty, and just talking about the fact that you've been thinking about it and that you'd like to work it through with them. Because there's a negotiation of rules that has to happen here, okay? But this is the primary relationship that then has agreed that each person in this relationship, or maybe even only one person in this relationship, is allowed to have some type of relationship with an extradyadic relationship. Maybe this is sexual, so maybe in the relationship they might say, you know what? Our primary relationship is here, but I will permit you to have sex outside the bounds of this relationship because maybe you have certain sexual needs that I can't fulfill, or you just have, needs that are important to you that you really want to get taken care of. And I'm okay with that. And so we've been able to talk openly about that, and I'm going to allow that. So we have opened our relationship in the sense that we are allowed to bring other people into our relationship in a certain way, with the acknowledgement that we are a monogamous primary relationship, that this is the only relationship that has maybe commitment or intimacy or romantic attachment or emotional discussion or disclosure. It depends on the relationship, and it depends on the rules that you want to have. Okay? Hello, Tree Hugger. By the way, it could end the relationship, Bio, but I might say, that's a decision for a person to make about whether they want to bring it up. But if it is something that's important enough to a person, then it's going to affect the relationship at some point. Might as well be open. Okay. All right, Sage. Sage, seriously, thank you for bringing your people over here. I really appreciate it. It's very kind of you to do that, especially since you did it only a few days ago. Thank you very much. I appreciate what you do. For anybody in here who doesn't follow Rocket Sage, you should totally follow her. She has a wonderful personality. Her stream is awesome. I'd back her fully 100%. So I hope you have a good night, Sage. What if you want to bring up the possibility of opening the relationship to your partner, but you're scared because your partner could just take it as you want to fuck other people? Is that a healthy way to approach the idea? That's making an assumption that may or may not be true, Bloody, and I would argue that if you are truly trying to have the conversation openly with your partner, you would understand that and you would be willing to validate that if they had that happen. So it talks about the strength of your relationship. Okay? And maybe you need to do that with a therapist around. That happens. Okay? So... said who? It's because of the legal implications of marriage. There's a lot of legality that goes into when you get married, you form a legal agreement, and in the eyes of the law, like, they get goofy about it. And also, we still have pretty conservative views in the United States around relationship configurations specific to marriage. So that's really what that comes down to. Okay. Back here to talking about this. So I just talked about open monogamous relationships. So those exist. Closed monogamous relationships are the ones that tend to carry the most privilege in the United States. It's the one that people tend to be the most in, is closed monogamous relationships. Most people in the United States make the assumption that if they're in a monogamous relationship, it is closed. Okay? You can still marry, but Gerbo, what happens is usually what happens in a polyamorous relationship is one of the relationships is married, and then the rest of them are not. And so as a result, they don't have the legal benefits that come along with marriage with that person. There was actually, like, again, I don't want to use this example. I want to avoid it as much as I can, I guess. Not that it's a terrible example, I suppose, but I just think TLC is trashy TV. But in the Sister Wives show, the guy actually ended up divorcing one of his wives so he could marry the other one for some reason. I don't remember what it was, but it's because of the legal implications of marriage. So okay, so again, closed monogamous relationship means there are two of us and we have closed our relationship off to extradyadic relationships in whatever capacity we have decided that they are closed off. Okay. Oh, okay, cool. Thank you, Peregrine. I appreciate you clearing that up. Okay. So, could it be possible to say a three-way poly relationship, two end up marrying, but the third is still involved in a relationship? Would that still be all right from the legal system? Yeah, as far as I know, Bloody, it is. Yeah. So, okay. So again, the part that people often get confused about when they think about polyamorous relationships is they think that all polyamorous relationships are open, and that is not always the case. Okay, so let's imagine, for simplicity purposes, we have a configuration of three people that are all in a triad together. Okay, so this polyamorous relationship is one where all three people are committed to each other, and they have all determined that they agree upon the rules of their relationship and whatnot. Okay, this relationship, though, can be closed in the sense that these three people could agree that none of these people in this relationship are allowed to seek outside relationship to get various needs met. So let's use sex because that's the most common example. That none of the people in this relationship are allowed to have sex outside of this configuration. So maybe these three people have sex together, or the dyads at a given point in time might have sex, but they're not allowed to go outside the relationship to get their sexual needs met. Or they're not allowed to go outside the relationship to get a certain emotional need met. That would mean that this configuration of the relationship is not open. It is indeed closed. So you have a closed polyamorous relationship. Okay? So I'm just to make it a little bit more complex. Let's say you had a configuration that looked like this, but these 5 people have agreed on this configuration, and these 5 people have agreed that none of the 5 people in this relationship are allowed to go outside of this configuration. Okay? Even though this person here is the only one that is with this person, that is still allowed within the confines of this relationship. Okay. Cool. Okay, cool. Thank you for clarifying. I don't watch enough of it, Peregrine, for me to know, so I appreciate you telling me that. Okay. So I hope this makes sense as I'm talking about this in this way. So then you can have open poly relationships, which is essentially where you have this configuration, say, like this, and within this relationship, all or some of the people within the relationship are allowed to go outside of this configuration to get a certain need met. And now you can imagine, regardless of which configuration you're in, whether monogamous or polyamorous, open or closed, it requires a significant degree of communication. Okay? I will say probably the most common configuration is often a dyad that then has like rules about, like, maybe there's a third person that's involved with this other whatnot, but there's still kind of a primary. Byridge, can you go over open monogamy? Yes. So, would swingers be counted as open poly relationship? It depends on how many people are involved in the relationship, bloody. So if there's only 2 people involved in the relationship and then they go and they swing, and there's maybe like, that might be considered an open monogamous relationship. If a configuration of like 3 or 4 people go and swing, then that would be an open polyamorous relationship, right? So again, we're talking about numbers here versus and rule. Basically, we're talking about numbers on this spectrum, and we're talking about rules on this one. Okay. So open monogamy is where there are 2 people that are in this committed relationship and have agreed that we are only with each other, that our commitments and our attachments are only to each other, but we are allowed to open this relationship up to potentially, say, having a sexual relationship with somebody else. I'm allowed to have sex with somebody else. You're allowed to have sex with somebody else, but we have rules over that engagement that basically, the rules exist within the context of this. These people are not allowed to dictate the rules of our configuration. So what this might mean is that these 2 people have decided, say this is 2 men, these 2 people have decided that if you're going to have sex outside of this relationship, you have to use a condom outside of the relationship. You have to use protection. They might also say there are certain things that you are allowed or not allowed to do when you're with the other person. They might say, if you're going to have sex with somebody outside of our relationship, you have to tell me first. Or they might say, if you have sex with somebody outside of our relationship, you don't have to tell me ahead of time, but you do absolutely have to tell me afterwards. And you have to tell me who it is. A lot of times within these configurations, people will say, if they're open, you are not allowed to have sex with any of my friends. They might have a list of people that are not allowed to have sex with. Okay. Not allowed to bring bugs home? Sure, Smuckers. Sure. You could say that. Don't bring lice home. Don't bring home STDs, that type of thing. Yeah, sure. Okay. So what this means, okay, I hope that covers it for you, BioRoots. What this means is that cheating can happen in any of these configurations, and it's important to understand that cheating is a violation of rules. It does not, having sex with somebody outside of your relationship does not necessarily constitute cheating. It might constitute cheating in your relationship, it would in mine, but for other relationship configurations, it does not constitute cheating because it is not a violation of the rules. If you are in an open monogamous relationship and you follow the rules when you have a sexual engagement with somebody outside of the relationship, that would not be considered cheating by an open monogamous relationship because the rules were adhered to. Where you would find cheating, say in an open monogamous or an open poly relationship, is, let's say we have a rule that says you have to use protection and you have sex with somebody outside of the relationship. And then I go and I have sex outside the relationship and do not use protection. That would constitute cheating within that relationship configuration because the rules have been violated. Okay? Does that make sense how that works? I really like, because that's a really important point, I think, within this, because people often think, kind of gut check, that when they see a polyamorous relationship that everybody's just cheating on each other, and that is not the case. What is the goal of love, in your opinion? Generally to foster secure attachment between two people or multiple people. Espen, thank you very much for the subscription. That is very kind of you. By the way, to all of you who have followed me tonight and who are new here and who have stuck here through the raid, because I know a lot of times what happens is people raid and then they leave. For all of you who have stayed here through the raid, I really appreciate you. It means a lot to me that you stayed. And for those who have followed and subbed, that means a great deal to me as well. It's very generous of you to do. For you to spend your time with me, let alone to spend any money on me, I really appreciate. So just wanted to throw that out there. I hope the stream's not dead, Thidian. By gunpoint? Oh my God, faking. That's no good. Well, I don't have you here by gunpoint, just so you know. But I am glad that you stayed. What is the best way for someone in a monogamous relationship to adapt if their partner wants to open or expand the relationship? Open and honest communication, Estella. Really, at the end of the day, your ability to speak openly and to validate, and you know what? Actually, that's going to take me into this next part. So let me talk about the next part. So this part's been established. Okay, we now know the difference between monogamous relationships, poly relationships, open and closed relationships. I am now going to talk a little bit about relationship development, which actually happens to be what I lectured about today. But I'm going to kind of talk about how that fits for this, because I think this is an important thing. When we're in relationships and when we are forming and developing relationships, whether in monogamous or polyamorous configurations, there are 4 things that we are basically trying to establish within the relationship, and 4 things that develop. Okay, the first thing that develops is what we call attachment and caregiving. Okay. So attachment in a nutshell, I've done a mental health topic night on attachment before, and maybe I'll do another one soon, but I'm going to kind of talk about this very quickly and give a brief overview because it's quite a complex topic. Well, actually, hold on. I've heard a few things about partners that are mono wanting to go poly, but how can you go about having a 3-way poly relationship becoming a 2-person monogamous relationship? How can they communicate to that third person? Ooh, boy, that is a really complicated question, and I appreciate it very, very much, Bloody. It's a tough one for me to answer. If 2 people agreed that they did not want a third person to be involved in the relationship, my guess is if they are healthy in their relationship, they would sit down with that third person and say, we are no longer interested in having you involved in our relationship. We'd like to be monogamous, and as a result, we are breaking up with you as a unit. That's what I would imagine it would look like, Bloody. It's basically the same type of breakup. It's just there's 3 people involved instead of 1. So, yeah. Let's see. But yes, attachment is quite deep. Okay, but attachment at its core. Okay, just in a nutshell here, when we're talking about attachment and caregiving, we're talking about reliability and consistency. It is also, our attachment figure is who we seek proximity to, both emotionally and physically, in times of distress. And it's also if the relationship with that person is threatened, it becomes highly distressing to us. Okay. So, within relationships, we develop a sense of attachment and caregiving within those relationships. Now, that could be in a monogamous relationship. That could just be one person to another. But that could also be like 3 people that form an attachment with each other. So, hold on, I want to make sure that I'm reading this correctly. Yeah, I was going to say, not all relationships have to end in children. I say that actually as a person who falls in that category. But for some cultures, for some people, a relationship, the end goal is to be able to have children. For others, they don't. I'm not going to get too much into that in terms of this. I want to make sure I keep it just with relational configuration. But any of these configurations can have children, monogamous or polyamorous. Okay. But again, what we're looking for is a sense of reliability and consistency within relationships. Sometimes when you're talking about a primary relationship, what we're talking about is that being the relationship that has allowed for a secure attachment so that the people within the relationship do feel safe to explore and to go outside of the relationship and open it up. A lot of times opening a relationship it happens really well when people are securely attached. It does not happen well when people are not securely attached. So, for whatever that's worth, it speaks to like polyamorous relationships that are effective are some of the most securely attached relationship configurations that there are, because there is a level of exploration and outside relationship that happens within those that if done in a healthy way means that there is a level of secure base within that relationship configuration, in part because it's been talked about really well. Okay. So, which leads me to communication. Okay. Say a mono relationship tried being poly and brought a third person in, but after a while, one of the partners doesn't want the third person in the relationship anymore, and they don't like it as much as they thought they would. The second partner wants to keep it going. Can healthy communication help with that, or would it take more? Oh man, all right. I hope that this is going to cover it here, Bloody. So just keep following me, Bloody, because you're asking questions that are great because they're leading me exactly where I'm going to go. Carrie Queen, thank you for the follow. I appreciate it very much. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. What Mythical Visage just said is really awesome too. Yeah, exactly. Blushing. A lot of people will report that. Okay. But communication is a really effective piece and needs to develop significantly, particularly within open and poly relationships, but in all relationships. Communication being my ability to articulate myself, my needs, my experience in a clear and full way that is not fragmented. Okay, so I can state my needs, I can state my expectations, I can state my rules, and I can send that message in such a way that the message that is received is consistent with the intent of the message sent. Okay, I hope that makes sense. That rolled off my tongue a lot better than I thought it would. But within open and polyamorous relationships in particular, there is a higher level, I would say, relative to monogamous relationships, of explicit communication and direct communication. Meaning that we have to explicitly talk about our rules. We have to explicitly say to each other, what are the expectations of this configuration? How is this set up in such a way that we can all be successful? What do we all agree upon? And what are our sensitive points? And if there is something sensitive that comes up, what is the method through which we talk about that? Because there might be a pathway within the relationship where, let's say we have 3 people who are connected in this particular way and have a polyamorous relationship. Let's say there's an issue within this dyad. We're going to have to explicitly talk about what happens. If these 2 people are arguing and get in a fight, are they allowed to triangulate this person? Or do they have to figure it out with each other and just keep this person in the loop? Again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. The important part is that is communicated effectively and established. I think we have to explicitly talk about our rules because we do not have cultural assumptions about how poly relationships work. Absolutely, Peregrine. And I don't know if this is your experience, but I think there's a level of depth that happens as a result of that, because the lack of assumption allows you to make the configuration be what you want it to be, and allows you to create a configuration that works for you. And I think that's pretty cool. Whereas if you're in a type of configuration that's laden with a bunch of cultural assumptions and all sorts of stuff like that, now all of a sudden you're operating off of just the assumptions and the implicit communication, as opposed to explicitly stating what the rules and expectations of your relationship are. So even if you're in a closed monogamous relationship, I as a therapist am facilitating open and honest communication with a closed monogamous relationship as much as I would be an open polyamorous relationship. But the thing is, in open and polyamorous relationships, there is a need for more explicit communication because of how complex the levels of that relationship are. But yes, communication, Tree Hugger, what you said, the golden rule, communication is huge, verbal and nonverbal communication. But again, it's really important to be able to send messages in such a way that they can be received in the way that you intend for them to be received. And so that's something that a therapist can help with quite a bit. Okay. In that same vein, the third thing that develops within relationships is the ability to joint problem solve. As you can imagine, within a polyamorous relationship or within an open relationship, the ability to problem solve is paramount, because there's a complexity to the amount of problems that potentially arise. So it's not to say that there are more problems that arise in a polyamorous relationship than there is in a monogamous relationship. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there is a level of complexity in terms of just by virtue of having more people involved. Okay, thank you for allowing that. I don't know why Automoderator caught that, Jinx. That was weird. But joint problem solving is really important. So that's kind of what I was talking about. That's rooted in communication. So can we use our effective communication and our attachment with each other to problem solve? So sometime, Ellie, hello. It's so good to see you. Nice to have you here, Ellie. Okay, that's no need to apologize, Ellie. It's totally okay. I totally understand. I stream at horrible hours for a lot of people, so it's totally fine. I'm just glad to have you here tonight. We might say that a problem that might happen in a relationship is that there is a desire to open it, that maybe there's some needs that aren't being met that we would opening a relationship doesn't have to be because needs aren't being met. It's just a common reason why people open their relationship. But can we joint problem solve this potentially by the way that we open our relationship is one way. But you have to be able to solve problems together and kind of have a sense that you're on the same page and that you're not combative to each other. Okay. And finally, a concept of mutuality. Mutuality is something that exists in both monogamous and polyamorous relationships, but I would say that it is something that is particularly paramount in polyamorous relationships. Mutuality being basically an ability to renew and renegotiate a relationship at a given point in time based on events or based on just kind of the demands of the environment. So mutuality is sort of a shared sense that we are on the same page. So again, in a polyamorous relationship or configuration, let's say it's one of these configurations where there's a whole lot going on here. Okay, do the 5 people involved here have a sense of mutuality about the expectations they have of themselves, of each other, of the relationship? And is this configuration able to renew itself, problem solve, communicate in such a way that they can constantly basically step outside the bounds of this relationship and then evaluate the relationship itself? Okay, so basically needing to have a State of the Union address for the relationship. Now, I recommend that monogamous couples do this as much as I would recommend a polyamorous relationship do this. But we really need to step back and take a second and evaluate the relationship configuration and make sure that everybody is on the same page. Do you have a term for people involved in a poly relationship that are not involved with each other? No. I actually don't, off the top of my head, Peregrine. Metamor? I don't know. I actually haven't heard the term metamor. I have heard of... No, you know what, Peregrine? Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to think like... So basically, if you had basically this configuration where these people are not involved with each other at all, you might just call like multiple monogamy. I don't want to say serial monogamy because that suggests there's a linearity. You could call it like co-monogamous relationships, maybe. If there's an official term, I don't know it. Or metamor. Okay, cool. I've not heard that word before, so I'm going to have to put that into my vernacular. Okay, if you put these 4 things together, if you've got secure attachment, if you have effective, open, honest, direct communication, if you have the ability to jointly problem solve and a sense of mutuality, that is going to lead to intimacy. Okay, intimacy is something that is achievable to the same degree within a polyamorous relationship as it is within a monogamous relationship. Relationships are capable of achieving intimacy if they are able to attend to these 4 things. An important thing to remember about these 4 things is that you don't just get one of these things and then you're done. It's not like a thing that you achieve and then it is forever present in your relationship. It is something that you are constantly having to work on. And polyamorous couples or polyamorous relationship configurations often have to really put an immense amount of effort into these 4 things in order for their relationships to work. And the ones that are successful, they do. But also in monogamous relationships, the ones that are successful are the ones that pay attention to these 4 things. Okay? So that's what I'm going to say about polyamorous relationships and open relationships in terms of like lecturing. I hope you found